I work in the CTO office, report to the CTO. I work on cross-portfolio strategy, so essentially trying to figure out with all of these various products we have in our software portfolio, how do they work together into a consistent, coherent whole. The kind of software we produce is primarily management software, so software for managing IT. And so one of the things I did started 6 years ago really, was to say, well, okay, we can do all the kind of architectures we want to do and how to get all of this to work together, but then it'll be an HPE thing, right? And then BMC and IBM and whatever other competitor, they will also have their own architecture. And the reality of the world is that in IT, it's a multi-vendor, multi-supplier environment. So these architectures won't work at the end of the day. And that's also what we saw is that every big enterprise, they would then create their own architecture as well and try to plug it all in. Very confusing. Very unlike in some of the lines of business like SAP, for instance, well, okay, finance, and you would basically say, I'll buy it all from SAP or all from Microsoft, and then you can stick to the vendor architecture. Then people are saying, well, maybe I don't like the SAP architecture, but let's not go into that rat hole. Now, so we thought, okay, can we create an international standard for how to do this? The problem with standard is it's slow and difficult, and what have I to do? So instead we said, okay, we'll create a consortium of like-minded people. So we were a gang of 7 that ganged together and invited a few more in. So Hewlett Packard, we were creating an initiative together with Shell, and then we invited Accenture, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Achmea, it's a big insurance company in Holland, Munich Re, a reinsurance company in Germany, AT&T, that was basically the starting point. And then a few more came as we went by. And then we sat down in a pretty aggressive schedule and created an architecture for how to manage IT. And it ended up being called IT4IT. So what do you need to put in place in IT in order to manage yourself, not manage finance, not manage HR, not manage all the other things you're doing, but actually manage yourself. IT tends to forget about that, really, okay? And then once we had a good starting point, then we moved into a standard organization. So we're using the Open Group. Anybody heard about the Open Group? Some nuts? Yeah, they maintain TOGAF as one thing. They were formed to maintain Unix, which they still do, and they do tons of other stuff, actually. But the good thing about the Open Group is it's a standard organization, and it's open, right? So you don't have to be a member in order to get the standards. You don't have to pay for the standards. If you want to be part of evolving the standards, then you need to be a member. So I encourage you to seek that out. Before I proceed, how many of you guys have heard about IT4IT? Oh, some. Good, okay. I actually used IT4IT. Okay, fair enough. It was a year and a half ago, it officially became a standard. And I would say the real uptake has just started, I guess, half a year ago. We released version 2.1, which is the next official release. 2.0 was the first standardized release. All the 1 series was the pre-work. And the 2.1 was released just a few months ago. You can buy it as a book. Or a pocket guide, so if you don't want to have the big one. Or you can actually just understand the entire standard in 8-9 easy slides. You can download all of that material as well from the web page. Or you can buy it. Anyway, that's what I'm working on. The starting point and I'm the lead architect in the Open Group, so I'm not going to talk about HP and what we do here. I'm going to talk about what we do with the IT4IT standard. Now, some of that text, I think, was in the invite. So basically, I'm saying I want to change it a little bit into saying, well, okay, that was IT4IT, but why should I care? What is it really that we are trying to solve here? So I'd rather talk about that first. But I will not talk about the original idea behind IT4IT, which was really to say, if I'm a customer of IT systems, I should be able to buy incident management from BMC, to go back to the previous speaker, incident management, but my service health management system, event management system, I should be able to buy from, say, HPE, and then I should just be able to plug them together. click, and it would work, which is not true today, right? So part of this was identifying where do we have all of these places where we need to plug things together and what should actually work there, so that you didn't spend all your time in solving that problem, so you can spend your time solving the real incident management problem, as Thomas was just telling us about in the previous session. But the another thing we realized as we evolved IT4IT is that there's a bigger thing going on that it can also help with, and that's what some people call the IT transformation. You can also call it the dual speed of IT, but you can actually, even further, in the last year, people are starting to talking about the digital enterprise, right? And the digital enterprise is very interesting because it really implies that IT stops being IT, but IT becomes part of the business. So instead of being 2-4% of the budget as a cost center, it actually becomes the center of the universe of the organization. And that's really scary, because then you need to behave completely differently than you're used to. And it turns out IT4IT can actually help you with that. I've had another title for this talk that I've used is, how do you prevent IT from becoming a speed bump in the road to the digital enterprise? I might have written it somewhere in there in the tee-up, because that is what we see happening, is that the enterprise try to avoid IT. And that's not a good thing for the enterprise. I don't care about IT, to be honest, right? If it's the enterprise we need to care about. So, I don't really want to talk a lot about this, but that's really about the new style of IT and what is happening. You can read it yourself, you can get the slides, you can look the video or whatever right afterwards. You all heard that preach about. There is a lot of change going on in the industry at the moment. But if I look at it from another point of view, and I have 3 slides now that are very busy in terms of text, but concentrate on the diagram and I'll explain that diagram as such. So traditionally, the way IT is functioning is that it sits in the middle. At least if you are a CIO, you think you are in the center. That's not really true. This is what sits in the middle, right? But you're the CIO, you sit here in the middle, and you have kind of a combination of central IT and line of business IT. So central IT is something everybody's using, and then line of business IT is the special IT you do for a particular line of business, which could be the finance department, or could be the sales department, or could be the manufacturing, or whatever, right? And actually, in the old days, the last time we had a transformation, the line of business IT were often led by some shadow IT, and slowly but surely the CIO have dragged it in and made it part of his IT organization in some form or shape. So shadow IT isn't a big issue for these kind of things any longer. I was part of the PC revolution. I have gray hair, and when that happened back in the 80s, right? And everybody was buying their own PCs in the lines of businesses, right? Because central IT did not understand PCs. That was horrible, right? But today, well, actually, okay, now you have bring your own device. But anyway, today, most organization has a good program for these kind of things. And then again, traditional IT, they understand that they need to have some suppliers that can either be, sell me some computers and some software, or it can be as a service suppliers of various sorts, or managed service suppliers or whatever, right? And they manage all of that, and that's great and good. And they deliver 4% of the cost to the organization, and they make it much more efficient up here. That's IT today. If that's your IT organization, you can use IT4IT to make this much more efficient, but that's not the interesting discussion. The interesting discussion is that what is happening with the digital business is that it starts creating its services by itself. In Denmark, our best example, and I'm sorry about not knowing the Swedish market enough to have a good example from Sweden, but I'm sure they exist here as well, but that's Danske Bank. They introduced mobile pay recently, which is the, not surprisingly, the mobile phone payment system, that within less than a year, they went from 0 to 70% of the population had it installed on their smartphones. And if you discount the number of people that actually do not have a smartphone, that might be 10%, right? Or the babies, or and these, well, it's actually 20%, I believe, right? Because You can be below 18, you're not allowed to do it, or you can be a retired person in a retirement home, and you might not really be efficient on a smartphone. So basically what they captured, entire market. Now, they did that with not 3 men in a garage, but almost, right? It was within the business. They employed a couple of programmers. They had an idea. They made their own business case, which was a very scary business case, and they built it up, and they used resources that were outside of IT, by and large, for developing the app, for hosting the app, for doing the things. Now, they needed at some point also to talk to central IT. And when it became the big thing, central IT needed to take over support of it and help desk and all the other things, of course. But it was not done by IT. It was certainly not IT that came with the proposal, right? But it wasn't even IT that was part of the development side. That's how it works today. Is there any problems with that? Yes, there are some serious problems with that. And the serious problem is that not in the very initial phase necessarily, right? They had speed and agility, and they could do whatever business wanted to do. But they might not actually have the skills in employing IT people that can do the right app development. The way they select suppliers down here, I will use Azure, because this guy happened to like Azure. It might be that they absolutely hate that supplier for other reasons, right? Or vice versa, they use Amazon and say, no, we are a Microsoft corporate shop for that. So they don't manage the supplier in the right manner. And even worse, when it becomes a success, then they ask these guys to take over. There's nothing worse than just being handed some mess and saying, now you run it, right? And yeah, we don't care about it, it's the wrong supplier, you deal with it, right? No, we haven't trained your help desk. And by the way, the guy that actually understands how to fix the code, he still sits over there and he doesn't want to go into IT, right? Because he wants to be part of the business. It's horrible, right? I think I said all of that. So what you want to do is to transform your IT organization into becoming the IT broker. So that when these guys sit over here, they actually don't start talking to Amazon or Microsoft or any of the other suppliers. They actually go in and use IT to be the broker. But you can only do that if you really are functioning as a broker. And now, the one thing that IT is good at is planning. It sounds strange, but in general, IT is actually pretty good at planning. The only problem with their planning is that planning cycle is 12 months, right? So ask for anything, we put it into a planning cycle, and we will deliver with a quality that you specify within maybe a year, maybe 2. Well, it depends on how much budget we have, so we need to go through that. That's not how a broker should work. The broker should work so that IT have already put into the catalog things that they believe these guys need, and you go in and you snap your finger and you got an Amazon account on a supplier, but you take care of all the billing and all the other stuff. And you, by the way, you prioritize saying, well, we're an Amazon shop, you're not going to Microsoft. Because this guy over here, he doesn't really care whether it's the one or the other hosting service. He doesn't really care whether you're using GitHub or SVN for your source code control. They take whatever they are comfortable with. But if this guy says, well, this is here, you snap your finger and you get GitHub, okay, GitHub it is, right? If I'm telling you it's going to be Amazon for your server hosting, okay, fine, as long as the decision has been made and I can get it at the same time. We've gone out and interviewed people. It is true. They are actually, developers are not as religious as you think about tool choices. But they are very religious about speed and ease of use. So, speed and ease of use, that's the issue with IT today. That's the transformation you need to do. So that's the landscape. So if IT wants to be relevant 5 years from now, they need to transform themselves into become an IT broker. And that's damn hard, pardon my language. So, when we looked at what is IT actually doing, how is it doing that, we identified that there are essentially 4 things that IT needs to do. I can present this in various different ways, and so I'll do it in 2 ways as we move into this presentation, because then you understand it better. But essentially, they need to form this broker functionality. They need, and there's actually 2 parts to broker, because there is the broker in the sense of, on behalf of the businesses, I need to figure out which suppliers do I need to get in. And in general, again, what we're talking about, instead of talking about planning, you talk about brokering. As IT, you shouldn't see yourself as competitor to the rest of the world. You should see yourself as a broker of the rest of the world. Some IT organizations are reasonably good at that, but others basically saying, well, either you take my solution, I develop it, I run it, or it's somebody else's solution. It can't be in between, right? No, you need to get into the mode of saying, well, I'm actually the one making sure that all the other stuff, the Amazons or the SAP as a service or the reporting solutions are all being sourced in the right place. And then you create the offer as you want the offer to be in your organization. In some cases, it involves development. In other cases, it just involves pre-testing, qualifying, making sure all the logistics about consuming such a service is put in place. And then you have a functionality that is all about fulfilling the needs of the business. That's the new one. That's the one that no IT organization today really have nailed. You can always find one exception maybe, but in general, haven't nailed. And that implies that anything you want from IT should be available in a catalog, and I should go in and I should, just like you go to Amazon or some of the modern as a service companies, and click and get an instance of whatever service you want. Get a seat on whatever service you want. And then you take care of the integration, either internally or externally for that. And then finally, you still have the job of managing stuff. That's kind of ITIL version 2 classic. Sits here, right? With underpinning contracts and all of these other good things that has been worked out. There's also where the help desk, to some degree, sits, but there is a lot of transformation in that area as well. We don't have time to go into that. Previous presentation was a bit about what you want to do with respect to that. There is another way of naming these things, which will be, and I actually think I have it on the, no, not on the next slide. Well, put this one on anyway. It says some of the words that I was putting on. But you could say in traditional IT, what you do is you plan, but you need to change how you plan. You build, you need to not always think about you building stuff, but also think about you create by using other people's stuff. And then you run. And this part almost doesn't exist. If you go into ITIL, there's a little bit about subscriptions and stuff like that, but it's very thin, and it's really in version 3 only, which is more a vision, but not a best practice. So a lot of organizations will have to do serious work in this area and some work in this area in order to do that transformation. And IT4IT is about that. If I look at what we do today in IT, everybody is screaming around about various funny things. You can probably find your primary buzzword. Actually, it's very difficult to read it here. But anyway, one of the things that a lot of people come out with is the word DevOps. Thomas, you mentioned it as well. DevOps is a very interesting animal in many ways. And at some degree is at odds with traditional way of running IT. Again, if I look at how Danske Bank developed the mobile app, it was to some degree in the spirit of DevOps, at least in the spirit of. That is, the guys that developed it was also the guy that was running it initially, right? And they put it to market fast, and they used not simulation, but they use end users for testing. And that's good and fine in the beginning, but DevOps is exactly where you then have the handover issue. But even IT itself wants to introduce DevOps, and in some IT organization, what they do is to say, okay, let's, for this next project, let's do it DevOps. And then they create a completely separate organization around DevOps. And they let these DevOps have free hands because that's the new and fancy and smart stuff. So they can, again, create their own toolchain. They can do whatever they want to do, almost. And then when it becomes successful, which it typically will, I'm all for DevOps. I think it's a great concept. It's the next version of Agile, if you will, because it goes that mile longer into production. But they haven't used the incident management system. They probably haven't used simulation either in order to be able to manage it. But what they do is that they have qualified people managing incidents, people that actually understand what is going on. They typically don't use a level 1, 2, 3 organization. It's a developer, and if you screw up, the developer has an issue, and he will fix it, and he will learn from his mistakes the hard way initially, right? And it goes into that cycle. But then we have the handover, because once it scales out, we have 4 million people in Denmark on mobile pay. I'm pretty sure the developer don't want to deal with the help desk associated with that, right? But then his monitoring systems, his way of handling, his knowledge base, etc., isn't run into Danske Bank's regular help desk. So now you have a handover again. So again, the IT4IT is a lot about not saying, well, you need to move everything from the line of business into IT itself, but actually also think about how can you work in such a multi-speed environment that comes out. So that's another theme that we have addressed in IT4IT, that saying, well, you can actually run a fast speed, a DevOps chain, and a slow waterfall. Stability is king. Innovation is not the important part. You want your finance system, your backup system, to just run, right? don't mess with that part in parallel, and still use a lot of the same IT management system for both of them. You can have different processes on top. So one of the things about IT4IT is it's not process oriented. You can choose your own processes, essentially. It is artifact oriented. It describes what are the key data objects you need to manage in the life cycle of all the various stages of a service, and what are the components that needs to then be around it in order to manage those things. And how can you exchange those artifacts between the various parties, external or internal. But it's also service-oriented, which everybody's talking about. Of course, we should be service-oriented, so no big surprise there. But it turns out, again, if you think about what it means to be service-oriented in IT, you suddenly have, it's like the elephant and the 6 blind men, which I hope you understand or heard that story, right? But essentially, depending on which organization you're from, it looks very different, what you're talking about. And that's one thing that we are trying to tie together in IT. So this is a classical example of an organization. They are, to some degree, organized around a service. It's actually something that ITIL has taught you already from version 2 with the CMDB. The CMDB that runs in ops has a pretty good, should have a pretty good, I should say, because again, in many organizations, it doesn't really have a good view, but if you have some good tooling, etc., you can actually get a pretty good view on what is running there, what servers do you have, what application runs on which servers, and you sort of equate an application with a service. That's an easy thing to do, and therefore you are service-oriented, right? Not really. The thing is that might work in operations side, but what if I go all the way over to the other end of the chain where you have the business leaders and the planning stage, etc., and the business demands come in? Do you really have a good understanding of what service you have running? You're pretty sure the CIO doesn't go into the CMDB and look into say, well, what do I have in my shop today, right? That's not how it functions, right? And what we saw when we talked to customers is that the classical thing coming from this side, the operations side, with the incident and problems and the assets and the RFCs and the changes and events, etc., going on, where you have a CMDB that works. You move over here, it becomes spreadsheet oriented. You have an exercise, take 3 months to really figure out what do you have in your basket. And when you're finished with that exercise, it's already a little bit outdated, and the amount of lying that can go on, because everybody wants to look nice. So the real picture is not the real picture you have over here. And then you make some plans about what you want to do, and you move in the other direction. And guess what? What comes out in the other end isn't really what was planned. There is no real end-to-end control over what is going on. And if you don't have that, if you told the CFO that he should run his finance the same way, not so good. He has a pretty good day-to-day idea about the budget, the plan, versus the actuals, right? But a lot of traceability, right? Not so in IT. Okay, I'll skip this one, I think, which is what I talked about before. So, come to the rescue. Now, finally, I get to the IT4IT side, and I have to do a time check. I forgot my watch at home, so yeah, I got another 15 minutes before Q&A. Okay. I only have another about 60 slides, so I'll talk fast now. No, sorry. So really what we did was we created two things. We created a reference architecture, which is very technically oriented, and then we created an IT operating model, which was very, I would say, business oriented. The IT operating model, let me start with that one. Actually, typically we have that to the left and not to the right. I don't know why I accidentally swapped it here. We created what we term the IT value chain. And that is essentially using Porter's principle. Anybody, do you guys know Porter? Yeah, okay. It's fairly MBA 101 stuff, so to speak. And it turns out that when we start talking to business leader in IT and put this one, well, no, let me put it differently first. If we talk to business leaders about, you should really use IT4IT because it will help you organize your business, and here is it. They say, yeah, I think you talk to this guy over there, and that's a techie of some sort with no decision power. If we talk about this is how your business really looks like. These are the value creating steps you have. Plan, build, deliver, run. We don't use the advanced terms yet with broker and fulfill, because that's not really in the mindset of a lot of people yet, so it becomes problematic if we use that word. And you have supporting activities coming from the lines of business. You immediately say, yeah, that's what I learned in my MBA, the general thing. I never, and then typically they would sort of say, well, I don't really understand the deliver part because they don't have it, right? And then we explain, well, actually your organization is not good enough. I say, oh shit, right. And we talk about the previous stuff, and then say, yeah, I need more of that. And then you can go back, okay, in order to implement this, let me talk to some of your tooling guy. I'm a tooling vendor, so that's where I want to go with it. And then we can talk about the underpinnings that needs to go into it. But you can use it for other kinds of dialogues as well. Is this important? I think I told about the open group, so I'll skip this one. This is the approach with the consortium, etc. So I'll skip this one. So as I said, this is the value chain. This is the important part. One thing that we're drawing here in the middle, which is not part of Porter's way of doing the value chains, is something we call the service model backbone. So again, if you talk to the business leaders, he doesn't discover it, and that's fine and good. But once we talk with people that actually really understand or think they understand about services, they want to know more about that. And so that's going to be the important one, and I will skip to that pretty quickly, then skip some of the other slides, given the timing we have. So one of the things we realized as we worked through this, and it's actually not that, I mean, there's nothing completely new in what we're doing. It's all about boiling together and standardizing stuff that we have talked about in the industry for a long time. But it turns out that essentially a service is modeled at 3 different abstraction levels, going through the initial part where we talk about the service at a conceptual level, which has a lot to do with planning. That's where you come in the business, say, I need a employee expense management service, just to take a very low level, simple thing to have something to talk about. And that's fine. And the business don't care anything about how it's delivered and what it looks like, but they have a lot of demand. There are policies around, should it run all the time, should it be highly available or not, etc. And that needs to be part of the portfolio. We need to plan out that from a capability perspective. And then you move into the create part, where you either develop it yourself or you source it in. And there you need to talk about, well, how can I actually deliver such a service, right? What is the design of the service? That's a logical service design. And that is something to do with, am I using external vendors or suppliers for the database of it? Do I integrate with the credit card systems? There's a lot of design that then goes into it when you're here. And then you put it into production, but you do it through this request to fulfill. That's and that's where you will start doing the transformation of your organization. So let's stay within the realm of this employee expense management system, right? If you're a small organization, you will only have one instance of it. So actually, there is only one request being made to say, let's take that design, that release, all of that software, and get it fulfilled onto some servers and sub-suppliers, etc., so that it can be run. If you're a large organization, you might have an instance in Europe and another instance in the States and a third one in Asia Bank. Then you actually request 3 instances of it. What happens in large organizations is that as you come with new designs, there's a cycle going on here, you only request the new updated version in Asia because you want them to test it out before you do it in Europe because that's your headquarter and you don't want the CEO to see all the problems or whatever, right, decision you're making. So that process becomes a very controlled process. The other thing that happens is that, well, not everybody needs to do employee expense management, but all the traveling people need to be able to do that. They need to have seats on this system, right? And that's not something that happens automatically. Maybe in some organizations you give them automatically, but essentially, depending on the service, you need to request as an individual person in the organization, I want to be able to do expenses. Okay, we can set you up so that you're all linked in, your account is set up, etc. That's also a request for my seat to actually work. There are different service level contracts to these various things. All of that needs to be managed here. The result is that you have a physical service model being constructed that actually represent what is running in a data center somewhere with all the dependencies. This one is the CMDB in ITIL version 2. You could say, if you're ITIL, I was tempted to say fanatic, then the combination of all 3 is part of the CMS of ITIL version 3. The reality is that most people trying to implement a CMS coming from the ITIL world, they're operations people. It's primarily operations people that do ITIL. All the developers, they don't care about ITIL. These guys, they're business people, they don't understand ITIL either, right? So you're saying, well, I can also do some of that, and I try to massage it into the the CMDB that I grow up to a CMS, right? But the developers, they would rather ignore it if they can, and these guys don't understand it at all, right? So what we are saying is, well, I actually wanted to say one more thing about it, because whenever you make a jump here, you can also change organization. Not only internal development organization versus a run organization, but it can be an outsourced organization. It can be that you actually have somebody to develop for you and they come into the organization. Or you can have somebody to actually manage what you run. Even the run part can be split up into the application is run by me, but the infrastructure is run by somebody else. So the ability to actually build up a complete picture of all of this spans many organizations. So the likelihood of you being able to create a CMS as a grand unified database of all the information, and I know ITIL version 2 doesn't say it needs to be a single database, but people trying to implement the ITIL CMS typically trying to implement it as one big database. That is bound to fail. I have a history in telecommunication where it was called an inventory system. They come from the ETOM standard that I was part of evolving. And they spent billions of dollars, all the big telcos, in creating a single unified database for everything they do. And they all failed. They've given up today, right? So let's not repeat that problem in IT, please. Okay. The blue picture. And I think that's the last thing I'm going to talk about today. I don't know. I've still got 10 minutes, so I'm good. So one of the things we did, again, in how we created this initially was that we talked to some of the big organizations. And I always talk about big organizations. That doesn't imply that this isn't applicable to medium-sized organization or even small organization. It is, right? But that's but there are more chaos in the big organizations. So the value is larger, right? You can deal with chaos in small organizations simply by talking to each other. You can't do that in big organizations. We sat down with Shell, for instance, and say, well, what does, they have an entire department with maybe 50 people, all being enterprise architects, and they work in TOGAF, they work with Archimate, and they draw diagrams of everything they do. They have tons of money, so they can afford that. So I asked them, so have you done it from IT itself? Yes, they have. So what is the architecture of your IT stuff? And they showed me something of this size, piece of paper, A0, right? But the boxes were this size, right? And it was all connected together with 250 different lines and countless number of objects, etc., all using the official Archimate language. And I happen to be trained in that language, so I could read it. But okay, so that's what it is. Have you implemented it? Oh, no, they have some problems because some of the vendors couldn't actually deliver according to the diagram, so they changed it, etc. So we're back to square one, right? Actually, the next meeting we had, they found another guy sitting in another enterprise department. They've also done it, also for IT. Same size diagram, but it looked different. So even for their own, they have two different pictures of it. So we say, well, what's the likelihood of we coming in as a collaborative organization to create an even better diagram? It's just going to be worse, right? So we said, okay, let's concentrate on what is the essential thing. Let's not have all the details in place, at least not initially, only the essential. It's a learning, again, from the telco world, where, quick question, anybody knows ETOM? There's a few nods, right? It's the big standard for telecoms, if you will. It has 7 layers of abstraction. So you start at layer 1, oh, actually it's 0. They count appropriately for programmers, right? They start at 0. And it's a very simple diagram, almost like the value chain diagram I showed you before. And then level 1 would be something like this, and then level 2 and level 3 and level 4 and say, we're going to do the same. 7, a little bit too much, so we concentrated on 5, and we said, we're not going to standardize more than 3 of them. This is the first one. And so what's the essence we should have there? So we took all of the artifacts that all of these companies we worked together with had. So they had the capacity plans, they had the incident, they all agreed incident is something we need to have, right? They had a service model, they called it CIs or whatever, right? And various things. And I ended up having a table of 120, I think it was, different objects you needed to manage in order to manage IT. And then then I put it into an Excel of all tools. Took on the other axis, I took all the capabilities or disciplines described in ITIL and in COPIT and other places, also about 100. And then in that matrix, put up saying, well, is this capability reading, basically the CROT, is it reading or writing or updating this particular artifact? And it turns out a lot of the artifact was very concentrated on a very small functionality, but some artifact really also communicated with neighbors or were used more. And we used that as the primary guideline to figure out what is the essence. And we came up with these 30 objects, the black ones, the round ones, right? And then we took the next step of saying, well, typically you would have a system surrounding that object that managed that object. So the incident object is typically managed by an incident component of some sort. It could be ServiceNow, or it could be our HPE service ITSMA solution, or whatever, right, BMC in there, and so on and so forth. So it's a decomposition, it's a logical component you need to implement that manage some essential objects in order to manage IT. And these objects sort of are very well connected. And what we also realized is that it wasn't until this third revision really that this concept of the logical, no, the conceptual, the logical, and the realized service model, when you get down into the real thing you want to manage, it actually ended up becoming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas, not 3 but 5. And even with a little bit of extra thing there. So that's the backbone. That's what ties it all together. You start with a conceptual service. which only talks about the business terms of what I want to do and financial terms of what you want to do. It very much relates to the portfolio backlog that demands or controls the portfolio demand coming in. I need one of these. You haven't already planned it out. There's something missing. You use it to define project scope, etc. By the way, this can look very waterfallish. Doesn't need to be that. It's just the object you need to maintain. You can do it in all kind of agile cycles, and we've proven that out in examples and real organization that has done it. Then you hand it over to from the plan side to the development side and saying, well, you need to actually design whatever you're doing. As you're designing, you work with requirements and defects and builds and build packages and all these various things. You actually end up with something that can be released that you also describe in particular releases. That's typically what sort of where Jenkins comes into play, etc., that manage these packages. But it actually turns out Jenkins is horrible in doing it in an enterprise manner. But that's another discussion for another day. And then you hand it over to the delivery side, where you have this fulfillment execution component, very obscurely named. We might change the name in the next revision because nobody actually understands it. But essentially, it manages the service instance lifecycle. So it manages what has been requested, what is the desired state of what we want to do. And then that engine drives whatever needs to be driven in order to actually put it into production and making sure the configuration management system keeps track on the actual model. And if you drive it that way, then you don't need to discover your service any longer. You can still go out and search, and you can find discrepancies, but they are being configured as part of deployment. You would know who owns it, you would know what SLA is available associated with it, etc. So if you follow this recipe of putting these systems in place, then you're in good shape. So what we do with that, that's what I want to end with, is that we go out, not just heavily packaged enterprise, but a lot of the companies that are now using IT4IT in their practice, consultancy practice in helping organization getting better, is they go out with something like that. They have a 1, 2, or 3 day workshop where you go out and say, well, where do you want to concentrate initially? Where do I have the biggest pain point? Let's say it's actually in the run part. Let's see, what systems do you have here? What systems do you have here? What system do you have here? Paint it up, basically a heat map. Is it red, yellow, or green in these particular areas? And then you say, okay, I actually have, very often in enterprise, I have 5 different incident systems, and 2 is probably enough, if not 1, right? So let's do a rationalization here. That's a good starting point for it. Or it could be that you go in and say, I really want to transform myself, but I have no clue as to how to do that. And there are recipes around what do I need to do around the fulfillment part, etc. What components do I need to put in place? What are the essential things to do? And that way, you can slowly but surely drive yourself towards an organization that can work in that agile fashion, that actually has control over the planning in an agile fashion in to deliver what the business wants to do. And the business, when they just need a service right now, they need for their own developers, they can consume it through a consumption catalog, and then you run it for them. That's what IT4IT is all about. And with that, I think I will stop here, because going into all the details, that will take another hour. Or I could go truly into the details. That would take half a day. But there are lots of things to do. Questions, yes?
Yeah, question. What has the uptake been for this until today? I mean, if I'm from IKEA, for example, and I would like to implement this and get in touch with Swedish consultants.
Right. So IKEA, funny you should mention it. We are working with IKEA, and we are using IT4IT in how we help them plan out their next set of primarily detector correct solution. And again, they are multi-vendor, so it's not only HP tools that are in that. In terms of uptake, I think we are around 20,000 downloads of the standards of known individuals. We're pretty sure that a lot of people download and distribute to other people, right? So in that sense, there are more people that have actually actively gone out and tried to get the standard itself and read the standard. We just introduced a training program last year, and you can actually get certified now in IT4IT. And and that has started out. We're less than 1,000 certified people, but it's taking up. We have great hopes that would be a big thing. There are 4 books published. So in that sense, there is about 100 companies that have joined that particular standardization group in the open group. That is the IT4IT forum, and it consists of the major equipment providers. So, well, obviously Hewlett Packard Enterprise, but also ServiceNow, BMC, IBM. Are active. Computer Associated is actually not. That's a missing company in that field. The number of consultancy companies that are in there is pretty high, but also in consumers. So overall, I would say it's really getting a lot of uptake. It's not nowhere near as big as ITIL is. Obviously, ITIL has a much longer history, much more trained people. And as I think I said in the beginning, it's not in conflict with ITIL. You can certainly do all your ITIL things, the incident and problem description in ITIL, you can implement on top of these things, right? But it does much more than ITIL do, and it's also much more prescriptive. That's the thing, because ITIL is not prescriptive. You can all implement ITIL, and it's completely different in your organizations. This is more difficult to implement and be different, which is important because then you start getting value out of repeatability. Okay?